Okay, this is the second video I'm making about my experiences of manic depression. And the first thing to say is that my life had gone really well throughout 32 years, and that's great, but I think I was ill prepared for when things started to go wrong. In 1995, I had a really good job with a huge company, one that, well, would most people have heard of it? Well, maybe not in America, no, but they're a huge multinational company. I was happily married. My wife was pregnant in 1995 for a short period of time and then had a miscarriage. And that was very sad. But we found out that early term miscarriages are very common, so we put it behind ourselves quite easily. Then in 1996 was a very important year in my life. My wife was pregnant again, and there was a situation at work. There was a big change about to happen that would have adversely affected about 30 or 40 people who I knew, just about all of them individually, and I was absolutely certain that the motivation for this was bribery, corruption. Senior manager of the company was taking bribes to sell part of the business to a supplier run by one of his friends. Now, I could quite easily say if it was part of my job to stop that happening, but I think even if it wasn't part of my job, I would have tried to stop it happening, because I just have a very, very strong views about such things. Anyway, without going into too much detail, in a short space of time, my wife had another miscarriage, which really affected me badly. Affected her badly as well, but this is my story. I'll put the emphasis on how it affected me. It affected me really badly, and the other thing was that I did everything possible to stop this move happening, and eventually I took a deep breath, went into my boss's office and said that I thought that corruption was the motivation for it happening. From his answer, I thought that he was probably corrupt as well. So I told the finance director, and he said, "Thank you, but leave it to us. It goes higher than you think." Anyway, my boss, who I now absolutely know was corrupt, tipped off the person who I'd accused. And after a while, I could see that this person wasn't going to be forced to leave the company, and I found myself in an impossible situation, and I became depressed. I became badly depressed. My view of the world became very pessimistic, too pessimistic, but I was depressed. I had a really good job. I could see myself losing this job, couldn't see any way out of it. I thought that the life that my wife and I were leading was going to come to an end, and I imagined the worst. I thought we'd be homeless. Obviously, I can see now that was ridiculous, given that we both had supportive families, but just going to work was torture, and when I went home I tried to hide it from my wife, and eventually it became too much for me to keep hidden and bottled up, and I explained to my wife and to my family, and everyone got really upset. And eventually I was given the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy from the company, so I did that, and eventually my depression lifted. I applied for another job. I decided to look for a job with less money, but with a company who I knew would treat people well, because I realised that I was in the previous company I was torn. I had very strong views about how people should be treated, and yet I was in a managerial position, so my loyalties was to the company, and I didn't want to have a conflict between my views and my position. So I went to work for a company who were very ethical, but unfortunately at that time they had a manager who was an absolute brute of a man, and he bullied me terribly. His language was awful, and he put me under so much pressure. Not just me, one of my other colleagues had some, not quite a breakdown, but something similar, stress-related incident. But he pushed me so hard, and I don't want to say what I did because that feels disloyal. But on the 9th of June 1997, I had a major breakdown, and I think it was triggered by the bullying at this company, but it was the burden of knowing quite a bit about corruption in the previous company. And I was beside my car in South Wales, doing the sign of the cross, thinking that one of the next cars, or at any moment a car would go past with a paid assassin who would shoot me to make sure that I didn't say anything about corruption in a very large publicly owned company. If that sounds familiar to anyone, yes, it's quite similar to the book and film The Constant Gardener by John le Carre, which was written several years after what happened to me. But last year, when I saw the film starring Ralph Fiennes and Rachel Weisz, I was pleased that the cinema was almost empty because I was crying uncontrollably at times. That night I was taken to a police station, and eventually they got into contact with my brother, who I will always be grateful, drove in the middle of the night 250 miles to pick me up and another 250 miles to bring me back home. I was taken to a hospital and given tranquilizers, and from that day onwards I had the diagnosis of manic depression or bipolar affective disorder, and that's enough for now, I think.